give us a little bit of your backstory again. Once again, sincerely apologize, and to all of you who are watching, it's just beat me up later.
All right. So once again from the top, I started as a drummer and quickly decided that I wanted to be a rock star long ago. And so I moved from southern New Mexico to the San Francisco Bay Area in the late 80s. Moved there and was moved there with a band I was with at the time. And we sought out a record deal, which everybody around us told us that was a 1 in a million chance. And within 3 years, we had a deal. And so I spent, a good chunk of my early adulthood in that band. And then after that band collapsed, I joined another band, got another record deal. So by the time I was 27, I had been through two pretty sizable record deals at that time. And this is the time, late 80s, early 90s, where there was no internet, there was no cell phones. It was all tape-based recording. And, the emphasis for playing was really put on the musician and not the technology so much. So somewhere in the mid 90s, a band approached me and asked me to produce a record of theirs. And I did so because I had the knowledge of how to do that, because I'd been making records as a drummer on the other side of the glass. And after making that record, I really got a huge thrill out of that process and seeing the record in record stores and also hearing it on college radio. And once I heard it, that just put me over the top. And I thought, okay, I'm tired of being a drummer. And after all the record deals kind of dried up, I took a series of kind of odd pro audio jobs, working at pro audio stores. I say odd pro audio jobs. One or two people, one or two companies in San Francisco I ended up working for, doing everything from working in a warehouse to sales to, technical support and all that kind of stuff that one would do in the world of pro audio. And mind you, this is like at a time when like blank CDs were just starting to come out to the public. And, I was working in this pro audio shop
Wow.
selling blank CDs to people at $150 for a box of 10, which was insane. See, now I'm elaborating on the story now that I'm telling it again. So long story short, I switched over to recording full time and really just going through various studio incarnations, eventually winding up in a studio in San Francisco, a classic studio that had been known as Mercury Records or Mercury Studios, and then Coast Recorders, most famously, which was a Bill Putnam. Bill Putnam came in and redesigned this room after he took it over from Mercury, and we I say we, a group of us, a couple of us moved into this building and ran it as a studio, which I took over the back part. And then I had a friend who ran a mastering uh, room in the front part. And this was in June of 2007. And it was very challenging because the economic crisis was just really taken off,
Right.
or the economy was tanking. It would be a better thing to say. And so through a bad economy and my own failures at business and trying to do everything on my own and do it on a shoestring, it really wasn't working out. And I was not being successful at it. So by 2012, about 5 years later, uh, with a great amount of pressure on my shoulders, I decided to get out of the building. And I came to my building partner and I said, hey man, I can't renew the lease when it's coming up here in less than a year. And he said, well, let's get a buddy of ours to take your place, and we'll make this work. We'll figure it out, which we did. And so in 2012, I was done with studio ownership and really happy to be out of it and greatly relieved. So I set up a home mixing and mastering room, and I started this podcast, Working Class Audio, really with the intent of asking questions from people that I knew in the industry, other audio professionals, and finding out how they were making a living doing it. what were the business things that they were doing, and it really was a show not based on gear talk. It was mostly based on lifestyle and business and a discussion of their journey and kind of dissecting their whole recording world without, really getting into asking about what mic do you use on the kick drum here. And I
Right.
just avoided all of that entirely.
Right.
I wasn't interested in what kick drum mics they were using. I was interested in the, excuse me, the decision-making process
Right.
of their career. That's where I was focused on.
Well, when I listened to your podcast when it first started coming out, which I've been I probably listened for the entire, maybe not religiously to every episode. I don't want to be that guy. But I will say that definitely I have listened to a wide variety of your shows and was there at the very inception when you first started this. And that's one thing that I thought that really made you stand out from the other podcasts. And that was just the fact that when I listened to what you were doing versus what others were doing, um, it just seemed like you got into more like the logistics of things instead of being everything like based off of, like you said, like what gear are you using? And some of those same questions come up, and sometimes, you get so bored answering when someone asks you like, hey, for instance, I get this question a lot. Hey, where do I boost a vocal, and where do I cut a vocal to make it sound good in a mix? And I always have to come back to like, I feel like making like a copy paste like response and saying, okay, it depends on source material. It depends on the singer. It depends on the room. It depends on the mic. What you're asking is a question that really cannot be answered in a broad spectrum on a forum or on a page. And so just get in there and do it yourself and find out what works.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
that's what I loved about, and still to this day, like yesterday, I was listening to your interview with Brad Wood, and just like I said earlier, just the down to earth approach, how you get into the nuts and bolts of things. And you guys talked about, I mean, life matters and how it's affecting studio engineers across the world. And to me, that right there, I think sometimes for us as audio engineers who are dealing with the stuff that's going on in these forums sometimes, and I'm not saying that those questions are bad. I mean, we've all had questions when we first started, but a lot of times like that's refreshing to like hear like, hey, there's other audio engineers that's going through these same struggles. That's, and not to mention you have this innate ability, and I don't know if it's just because you know these individuals so well, but it's like you pull things out of them that they maybe weren't even going to talk about in the podcast, which is super cool. So
I just have no fear when it comes to asking questions of my fellow audio professionals.
well, it definitely shows. And I think um, when I listen to the podcast, it comes through in such a way too, where it doesn't make you seem like you're harping them or anything like that. But I don't know, guys, like I said at the beginning of this, if you have not subscribed to his podcast yet, go and check it out. You owe yourself that. And so that brings me sort of dovetails into this next question, because several of the interviews that you've done with individuals that I look up to, they have time and time again sort of skimmed the surface of this. But I want to know from your perspective, when you're working on something, like someone sends you a mix or someone sends you something to master, uh, or maybe they want your input on production elements that go into a song. Do you feel an emotional connection with that song? Like as soon as you're hired on, as soon as you're working with that song, do you feel like an emotional connection with a song?
Yes, I think so. The connection that I feel really pertains to my desire to make the song, presented in the best way possible. I feel like a defender of that artist. I
Right.
feel like I'm not going to let this thing go south, not on my watch,
Right. That's a good way to
So
put it.
I think that's the emotional connection I feel to it. Do I feel an emotional connection to what they're singing about? Not always, no. I'm more interested in the protection or God, I don't want to, it may sound dramatic to say guardianship, but I just kind of feel like I'm the steward of that song at the moment. They've handed it to me to mix it or to master it, and I want to make sure that I'm doing it justice and that I make them proud. So, that can be tough because, inevitably self-doubt will kick in and at one moment you're like, "Oh, this is sounding awesome. This is incredible." And the next day you listen to it and you're like, "I don't know. I don't know if they're going to like it.
Right.
Have I taken all their direction and have I applied it correctly?" Uh, you know, People use words to describe music that one person's uh, bright is another person's thin.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
One person's fat is another person's, you know, cloudy or whatever, and that can be difficult to translate those words. So sometimes I up front will ask people, well, what do you mean by that? What does thin mean to you? What does bright mean to you? And I really try to dissect that up front.
So if you guys are listening, Matt just dropped a truth bomb right here. He just gave you all a revelation. If you get to the point where I know several of you who are watching the channel from time to time are telling me that you're just getting into mixing, you might be just getting some new clients. What he just told you was golden. What what he said was basically be as open and as transparent and get as much information as you can about the project and make sure that you're asking the right questions. Now, that's an awesome way to really cut through a lot of what you'll do is you'll end up saving yourself a ton of time because, like he said, everyone's terminology is different. When I had Brian Wampler on the podcast, when I interviewed him, we actually geeked out about all these different terms that people talk about: crunchy, fat, wet. I mean, on and on. I've even heard a bass that sounds like a fart in a bathtub. So you just got to cut through all that madness and just ask, okay, like he said, what does that mean to you? So, very, very good answer, Matt, which I knew you was going to knock it out of the park when I brought you on here. Um, so that also brings me to dovetails into another question that I had because you've been doing this for a long time. I want to know, like when you're working with clients and you're working, sometimes over phones and stuff like that, what is your sort of like your go-to method of communicating back and forth? Is it through Skype? Is it through emails? Is it through Hightail? Like what system logistically are you using to communicate back and forth and send files back and forth?
Well, currently, I mean, I've been through a whole host of things over the years, but currently I'm using FilePass to upload the files, and FilePass can handle not only high res playback over a browser, but it can, the client can download the song. Let's say it's a mix. Let's say it's a single mix. They can download the song or they can listen to it right there in the browser. They can also drop comments in at different time points, just like SoundCloud, but this thing makes SoundCloud sounds horrible compared to this.
I agree.
So, FilePass is what I've been using, and let's see what else. As far as communication goes, I'm old school. I love the phone. The phone is the best,
Right.
most immediate way to communicate with somebody. You can go back and forth on emails and texts and delaying the conversation, or as far as what you say over email, that can be perceived in a multitude of ways. That can be
Right.
perceived in the wrong way. Case in point, I had a mix that I did most recently, and it was a mix that when I was done, I was like, wow, okay, I'm happy with this. And I think the client's going to be happy. He sent me an email that said, I'm really unhappy with the guitars. Let's talk. And I thought, what on earth is he talking about?
Right.
What could he possibly be just, talking about here? And my mind started to race, and I started to think, "Eh, maybe I'm just attached to this mix and he's not." And I started to make up all these scenarios in my head and get kind of nutty about it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just called him and I said, "Hey man, so your email was a little confusing. I think this mix is really outstanding, and I'm curious what your thoughts are." And he goes, "Oh, the mix. The mix is really outstanding. I agree with you. The guitars, there's this guitar line that's a little bit out of tune, and that was a problem that we had when we tracked it. And I'm hoping that you can help solve it by auto-tuning the guitars because it's just flat and it's rubbing against the vocal line." And that's when I was like, that's why I hate email. That's why I hate text and email. I just pick up the phone, get them on the phone, get the information back and forth quickly. The emotion, the intent is much clearer to understand when you do that.
Very, very good tip. That's yet again kind of going back to the same thing we just talked about a minute ago, just cutting through all the madness, going straight to the heart of it. And much
Hey,
like,
oh,
yeah,
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, you're fine.
I thought you were done. Uh, I see Zave has a question.
Yeah, yeah. So
Hi,
let's
he says, hi, Matt. That bigger, warm, smooth sound I'm hearing on reference tracks, is that simply EQ or compression, or is it basically the facilities and experts on the pro song? Well, this kind of goes back to what you were saying, right? About it depends. It depends on so many factors. What does bigger, warm, smooth sound, what does that mean to you?
right,
And also, it depends on the track we're talking about. And generally, um, it's a combination of all the things that Zave mentioned, which is it's it's EQ, it's compression, it's the players, it's the facilities, it's everybody involved. It's all the links in the chain that add up to that, that final product, that final song. The mastering engineer, the mix engineer, everybody. So I don't know if that answers the question.
yeah. It seems like there was another one too. I want to make sure we get to all of these. Which, by the way, if you have not yet, just a small way to support the channel and to make sure, like to guarantee that your question will get answered, is to use the super chat. You can do that for $1 all the way up until 5,000 if you'd like to. Please use the 5,000. But by doing that, you will guarantee that your question will get answered. And anyone who does a super chat on my channel, if you've been here before, you know that I will always send you a freebie for any amount of donation. So if you want to make sure that your question gets answered, use that super chat button. So
Do
the
you see this one question from Bop Studios? How do we
yes,
keep from
yes,
getting too involved in a mix? Whereas sometimes I can't tell if it's my opinion or keeping the song non-influenced by me.
right.
That's a great question.
It really is. It really is. Um,
Um,
do you want to answer that, or can I take a bat at it, or you want to both kind of
yeah,
bounce off it?
tell me what your thoughts are.
Okay, so one thing that I always try to remember about, because involvement's going to be there, that's part of the reason why I asked Matt this question about does he feel an emotional connection. Now, what I try to do is I try to realize that it's not about me. If I try to at any point in time when I'm mixing someone else's work, you have to realize, especially if it's like a singer songwriter that has wrote that song themselves, it's very precious to them. And so if you get in there and you start injecting your, I think it needs to be like this, or maybe we need to have a break here, you really need to kind of let them have the run of that, unless they're asking you for, suggestions or something. That will be the first thing to help you from getting too involved, because the second that you take ownership of it and you say, well, this is my mix and this is my song that I'm producing, that's when you can kind of cross that line into over involvement. And then what you end up doing is actually you end up producing something that the client may or may not even wanted to begin with. And so the best way to keep from getting too involved is just to remember to keep yourself on the back burner, sort of in the shadow, so to speak, and let them speak to you what they want, what they need. And I'm not saying you can't make suggestions, but make sure that they're just suggestions. So I hope that kind of, Matt, what's your take on that?
Well, it's a little bit of a mixture. My thought is the minute you ask somebody to mix a song for you, you're asking for their interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
And you you know this may you know I may be very giving away my age here naturally by making this reference, but growing up watching Star Trek, there was always this on the show. There was always this mission where they didn't want to interfere in other cultures
Mm-hmm.
in any way, and inevitably they they got in and got involved one way or the other. So my point in saying that is the minute you lay your hands in a mix, you're involving yourself and you're involving your opinion of how it should be presented. But it also depends on the relationship between the artist and the mix engineer, because when somebody says, "Hey, I want to come and sit with you and tell you what I want along the way," I just don't work like that. I stopped that long ago because I found that when I have somebody sitting with me, because I'll refer this back to my early days as a drummer. When I find that when somebody sits down with me and says, "Okay, yeah, let's turn that up now. Let me hear that."
Right.
That's a button pusher job, and I'm not up for that. And
Right.
I don't do that with people. If they want to hire somebody at a lower rate for that, that's fine. When somebody asks me to mix, I'm going to put, whether I want to or not, my imprint is going to be on there. And it's not intentional, but if I mix something and you mix something, we're going to mix it very different. We're going to hear it differently. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
approach it differently. We're going to have different techniques to get the sounds to shine in a particular way. We may have two different ways of getting the vocals to sit just right. So, what I found, and I learned an early lesson when I used to be in this band that was on Warner Brothers, and you can look up the ridiculous videos that are out there. I was in this band called 7 Day Diary, and we did a record with a producer named Gil Norton. And Gil had worked. Gil's name will come up in he did The Color and the Shape with the Foo Fighters and Recovering the Satellites with the Counting Crows, and he produced, and he also worked with um oh God, I'm spacing on the name of the band. Anyways, he worked with some great bands, and he worked with us, and then he had this guy Dave Bascom mixing, and the whole band, we sat in the control room with Dave, and Dave had mixed a bunch of stuff, and we sat there and in typical band fashion kept raising our hands going, "Hey Dave," if I'm talking, I'd say, "Hey Dave, can you
Right.
turn the snare drum up? Can we have the snare drum louder?" And the vocalist, "Can we have the vocal louder? Can we have," everybody wants their instrument louder. And so we drove him crazy doing that. And was the mix okay? Yeah, it was fine. I think ultimately Dave did what he wanted. But the lesson that I learned was when Warner Brothers in the US heard the record, they said, "This doesn't sound like American rock radio to us. We need to have one of the singles remixed." So we had Tom Lord Alge remix one of the songs, and we couldn't be there. And Tom sent the mix. And at this period of time, there was no internet. So somebody FedExed a DAT tape to our manager in LA. And so we're at our manager's house. He says, "Hey, I got the new mix from Tom." We put the DAT tape in and we listened, and my jaw hit the floor. I was like, "Oh my God, that sounds amazing. Can he remix the whole record?" That would be fantastic. And the answer to that was no. It's going to be too expensive to
Right.
add that into it. But the lesson that I learned right then and there was it's better to get the objectivity needed to take in a song when you're not there. And I always make food analogies. If you're going to sit there, if you're going to go to a restaurant, you are not going to go into the kitchen as the chef is cutting the carrots, prepping the ingredients, um, and stand over their shoulder and go, "Are you really going to put that much sugar in that recipe? Ooh, I don't like carrots."
Right.
You're not going to do that. You are going to be at your table. They will serve the meal, and you will, you'll do the basics. You'll taste it, and you'll either love it or you hate it, or you might want a little extra salt. And I treat mixes the same way. I get it to the point where I'm happy, then I present it to the client, and then they say, generally at that point, that's when you realize the simple things, the salt equivalent of a mix, where and the salt equivalent is people are either really big on effects like reverbs and delays and they want a lot of it, or they don't want any of it or very little of it, and also vocal volume. But generally I find that everything that I do in a mix generally is in agreement with the people that I work with. And it's always just the tiny little details like, "Ooh, I like that. Can we pull that effect down a bit, or can we push it up a bit? Or can we try a different reverb?" It's never a wholesale, "Oh, that doesn't work for me," kind of a thing.
Right. Well, like Bop Studios just said, excellent analogy. And I apologize, Bop Studios, by the way, for it looks like Streamlabs told you to refrain from using foul language. And I guess they thought anal was in there and that was foul. But anyway.
Well, so I don't know. I kind of got off into the weeds there with you know, getting too involved. So, but that's how I mix, and I've lost, some work, before with people who are really into being there with you. I had these guys who were kind of new at the process, and they said, "Yeah, we'd really like to be there right with you and get in the mix with you." And I was just like, "Look, this is going to go 10 times slower if you're here. I can get this done in a more efficient manner if you're not here." And they came back and they said, "We respect your position, but we think we want to do it a different way. So thanks." And I said, "Yeah, no problem. Good luck to you." So
So it looks like Jamie Cauldron asked, he said, "I asked someone about, with experience, with the interface from Behringer, the Euphoria 404 UMC. Um, I personally have not used any Behringer products, or I should say I haven't used this particular product. I've used Behringer products. I got nothing against them. But I have not used it, so I can't give you a definitive answer on that. Matt, have you,
no, I'm not familiar with that piece.
okay.
Sorry about that. I wish I could be of more use on that.
What I have heard is, that they're affordable. I have heard that. I can tell you that much. Okay, so Jamie also says, how do you convey just that? The fact that a piano, a guitar, and a male voice at the same time might hide one of them. Jamie, you might have to rephrase that question, just in a way that I'm not sure what you're trying to say there, buddy. Not to be rude.
Yeah, I'm not really clear with maybe that was part of another question,
Yeah.
or tied to something else, and that's lost up there in the feed.
Yeah, you guys are more than welcome to go back and copy and paste your questions that maybe didn't get answered to. You don't have to super chat to get it up on the top. You can just literally re-ask the question. That's possible too. Okay, so looks like someone else said, Jamie also said, Jamie's like the star of questions right now. He says, it all depends. Jim Keltner refused to drum for Leon Geico during a session just because Jim has his own interpretation of a song. We're talking about a famous Argentinian singer-songwriter. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Jim Keltner is, I mean, if I was hiring Jim Keltner, I'd be hiring Jim Keltner because of Jim Keltner. And I would absolutely want him to do whatever it is he wants. And if he asks for some direction, sure, I'd give him some direction, but I would let him do what he thought was the right thing to do, because it's Jim Keltner. Come on.
Okay, so Bop Studios, I think he's clarifying what Jamie asked. He said, I think it's an EQ question. Okay. Yeah, as we just kind of touched on a minute ago, we really can't, because every session's different, every instrument, every singer is going to be different. I can't, neither one of us, I think I can speak for Matt in this and say, like, we couldn't give you necessarily like where to boost or cut an EQ to make those things great, because everything's going to be different. Now, if you're talking about in the sense of, say for the sense of like the singer is fighting that they want to be heard more than the guitarist. Now, if that's the case, then that would be more of a mixing standpoint, where after the fact you can mix them to where they sound balanced, which is what a mix engineer does. They balance things. So if you want to ask a question about how you would go about EQing that, maybe that would be for another time or something like that. But we're going to kind of keep this closer around, working in a studio, or just general questions. Don't try to keep it like too pointed towards specific EQ regions or anything like that. But you're more than welcome to ask any question. I'm going to go ahead and move on to another question that I have for, wait a minute here. I just got sidetracked. Shiny object. Okay. I was trying to make sure I didn't miss that last. Okay. All right, Matt, I want to make sure that I get some of my questions in here as well too. So what one piece of advice, given the fact that you have worked with a lot of different people, what one piece of advice, if you only had one to give, would you give to audio engineers or musicians who are just starting out?
Make sure your business and money house is in order so that you don't make decisions based on desperation for money. In other words, if you're overdrawn in your bank account and somebody offers you a gig and you're willing to, bend your own rules just because you desperately need that gig, that's not a good position to be in. So make sure that, you're financially in order on all fronts so that you can make, like the example I gave earlier of the guys that wanted to come and sit, side by side with me and mix. I gladly turned it down. I was like, no, that's okay. I don't need to do that. If that's why you can stand your ground on something like that and say, no, this is how I work. I know myself well enough that I want to give people the best of what I have to offer and bring value to the table. And these are the ways in which I do that. This is the workflow in which I do that. So by having my financial house in order, I don't have to bend my rules at all. If I was in a desperate situation financially, then I'd have to say, okay, sure. And the project might not turn out very well.
Right.
But, this is coming from, someone who's made a lot of mistakes and learned a lot of lessons over the years of how not to do things based on how I work. Now that's how I work. That doesn't mean that's going to be a universal thing for everybody. But either way, having your financial house in order, I still think is the number one piece of advice I would give.
Awesome. Guys, and he's, like he said, he's speaking from experience. So, excellent answer, by the way. So if you had to do it all over again, I know this one's going to be kind of tricky for you, but if you had to do it all over again, what would you change, or what would you tell the old you, like, this is what you need to do or don't need to do?
Oh, this is a time travel question.
Yeah. We're going back in time now.
Well, I think the old me would tell the young me rather than the young me telling the old me. I think the old me would tell the young me the same thing. I would tell the young me, hey, you know what? You need to change your behavior and your relationship to business and money now, because you're going to make a series of mistakes and decisions that are going to screw you up. But that's the problem, though. That's the quandary in that question, because if I did that, then the future me wouldn't necessarily turn out the same way, right?
Right. Yeah, you got a point there, because I try to look at it from that standpoint myself sometimes, as hard as it is, that regardless of what may happen in certain situations, if that didn't happen, like what you're saying, would you actually be where you're at right now? And would you maybe have done something worse if you hadn't learned that lesson like early off? So
Yeah.
that's now we're getting all esoteric and
We're getting deep. We're going to go deep.
this is deep, guys. Put your put your thinking caps on. We're getting deep here. Okay, so this is definitely going to be a gear question. I love gear. I can't do without it. I've got gas bad. Which I put that on the chat the other day, and it was shocking to me that someone didn't know what gas was.
Gear acquisition syndrome.
Thank you for explaining that. Yeah, the individual was like, I don't understand. You've got gas. I was like, which maybe that's just an older term that not everyone's used to, but.
Or gear lust.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it too. So this is a gear lust question. What one piece of gear do you have that you could not do without?
My ears.
There you go. That golden.
Yeah, I mean, if my hearing goes, that's it. I'm done. I'm going to have to just kind of reduce my services offered.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's crazy too, because out of all the people that I've asked that question to, no one has ever said my ears. But I actually have talked about numerous times on the channel that your best piece of gear are your ears, because you can have the greatest converters, you can have the greatest outboard analog gear, you can have the greatest, everything. But if you got tinnitus, what does it matter?
Yeah, your ears will help you determine the pieces of gear that you buy.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I'm going to say my ears. I know that that's not what people wanted to hear, but excuse the pun.
No, that's punny.
Bob Studios has a great question, though. I've done some mixes gratis to get my services out there. Advice? Have you all done that before? Yeah, I've done that. I've done mixes for people for free, but it's only in the case of what have I done that for? I've done mixes in trade. I've had somebody watch my house and my dog when I go out of town, and I was in the middle of a mix or finished a mix for them, and I just said, well, instead of paying me for the mix, why don't we just call it a trade? I'll mix this song, and you watch my house and my dog for this period of time while I'm out of town. And they were all for it. As far as doing stuff for free, Tony Maserati there's a clip of him from a Mix with the Masters thing out there. You could probably find it if you just go on YouTube and type in Tony Maserati work for free. Tony's answer, I think, is classic, and I'll paraphrase it as best I can. And that's, people don't really value you in the same way when they're getting it for free. I think instead of, to get your services out there, your services need to be, it needs to be equitable, even if it's a trade. But doing it for nothing, I don't think is the greatest of ideas. I think get people to buy you a meal or, do something just to say that, okay, you're going to give me this. I'm going to give you something in return for that. Because when it comes to, let's say you're working with an artist and you've been, mixing them for free. Well, when it comes to the next level of their success, it is inevitable that they will bypass you and go to somebody else that they value more and pay them. So why can't you be that person, Bob Studios? Why don't you be the person that, even if it's a nominal amount, it doesn't have to be a whole bunch of money, but it could be, $50, $100, a meal, a couple meals. Maybe they make something. Maybe they're artistic in other ways, and, they can knit you a blanket. I don't know, but don't work for free is my advice. Never work for free.
Wow.
Unless there's one exception to that. If there's a project that you really want to get involved with, a band or whatever it is, and it brings you pleasure to do it, then maybe that's the exception. If there's a band out there that I want to work with that out of pure pleasure, I would say, hey man, can I mix one of your songs? I want to do it just for the sheer enjoyment of it. That's a different thing.
And if I could just not to take away from anything that you just said, that was an amazing answer, but rather to add to it. If you look, he was talking about value and how they see you and how much value you inherently have in their eyes. Take, for instance, just as an analogy, for instance, Kia, when you think of Kia cars, you think, hey, those are cheap. And there's a reason why Kia cars are always on sale. And there's a reason why that's happening. But Jaguars, for instance, hardly ever have a sale. Everyone
That's
who
right.
comes to a Jaguar knows the price of that car, and they know the value that's behind that car. And they tell themselves, most people that are buying the Kias tell themselves, like, hey, someday I'm going to get me a Jaguar because I know it's a good, dependable, and it might even be the very same components. But the point is, because they have already like stamped on that intrinsic value of their product and said, we're not budging, we know that we're worth it. If you want it, come and get it. Then that automatically provides that value.
Yeah.
And that's, man, you brought up some really good points there. So,
It's a perception thing. So if
exactly.
you're working for free, people aren't going to place as much value on that.
And to your point, like you just said a minute ago as well, I mean, I've done mixes and masters for free with artists that I've wanted to work with, and I've done some just to get out there and to have something to work on. And in other words, to just, and I've said this time and time again, if you want to get better at mixing, mastering anything, recording, tracking, whatever it is, you will never get as good. And this is kind of self-depreciating because I sell courses, but you could buy all the courses in the world and it's not going to help you as much as a large body of work is going to help you. Actually getting in there and getting your hands dirty and doing it, that's what's going to cause those eureka moments where you're going, wait a minute, for some reason, I just cut 400 hertz on a kick drum and it made it louder. It made it thump and bump. What happened? And so a large body of work and doing that stuff, sometimes you have to reach out to individuals for free to get that large body of work. However, there are tons of people out there now. Warren Hewitt is one of them, who gives away multi-tracks all the time. There's places you can get really good, well-recorded multi-tracks, and I would actually encourage you to do that too, just for the simple sake of that way you can hear what a good recording sounds like.
That's right. You took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say the lessons people learn when it comes to mixing are learned generally when the mix is done. And because when they complete that mix, they reflect back on all the decisions that they made and they think, oh, okay, now I know how to get out of that situation or, make this particular thing happen. And the way to do that, if you don't have access to material is to go to somebody like Warren, who's got those multi-tracks. In fact, before our call, I was actually working on a remix of a song that I did with a band years ago that the tones are the drum tones are horrible. And it was definitely an amateur sounding project that I did when I was much younger than I am now. But I have, because now I have the ability to pull that stuff up and get away with stuff that I couldn't get away with in the past. I was able to pull it up, remix it, learn some new lessons along the way, and then put it away, because unless I send it to the former members of the band and say, are you interested in re-releasing this? But going through that exercise of just mixing and learning about things is really important, I think, because then you have more confidence when you have paying clients. This is kind of geared towards more the people that don't have a lot of experience, but even someone like myself who's been doing it a long time, there are things to be learned still. You can't possibly know everything there is to know. I'm no expert. I'm not the smartest person in the room. I just, I've persisted. I've stayed here. I've kept going. And one of the ways you keep going is you keep your mind open to learning from mistakes and just learning in general from, people old and young alike and new mixes and old mixes, et cetera, et cetera. So
And
the
along
beginner's,
those, I'm
the
sorry,
beginner's mind.
along those same lines, one thing that I have picked up on over the years of studying individuals who are really good at their craft is like Matt just said, they want to continue to learn. So one of well, in my personal opinion, the world's greatest drummer, Neil Peart, from Rush. The one thing that I always picked up on is he was taking lessons before he passed away. He was taking lessons from older individuals and from young people even. And he was still, even though he was considered like the greatest drummer in the world, when they asked him, they said, "What in the world are you doing taking lessons?" He said, you don't ever quit learning. When you quit learning, you grow stagnant, you die. And
Yeah.
on the other end of that spectrum, I believe it was Al Schmidt, which is an excellent mix engineer, tracking engineer, mastering engineer that I look up to. He said something one time during an interview that just completely, it blew my mind. He said that during the early days and even on a lot of sessions now, he doesn't even use EQ. I'm like, how in the world does he do that? But he said, because I'm constantly learning what my mics do. I'm constantly learning what my room does. I'm constantly learning. And so to Matt's point, if you ever get to the point where you feel like I've got it, I've got this, it's in my back pocket, I am the best, you are going to fall under the weight of your own big head. Be very humble and continue to learn as much as possible. So
That's funny.
very
Bop Studios, Chad Wackerman. It's been ages since I've heard Chad's name. That's a drummer from the past who I used to pay attention to a bit, but
yeah, and he still takes lessons as well. See, that's
yeah, man. You got to keep learning.
so I've got a couple more questions for you, Matt, and then I won't keep you much longer because I realize your time is precious. The other question I had, and this one's just for me. I just wondered, which style of mixing do you prefer, analog or in the box?
Oh, no doubt, in the box.
In the box.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I did analog mixing for a long time, and there is an immediacy there, but to achieve the results and get the level of detail and also the recallability that I want, I can only get that in the box.
Right.
Because in the box mixing is very economical for a number of reasons, as we all know, but sonically, I can get out of it what I need to get out of it. And in fact, I had a client who came to me. I've had a couple clients over the years where they had this kind of, they were obsessed with the tools. And I'm big on analogies, and it was as if, imagine if you went to somebody who was building a house for you and you said, "I want you to build me this house, and I want you to use only traditional hammers, no nail guns." That's the kind of ridiculousness I find in people who have come to me in the past and just said, "Man, can we just, do this on an analog console?" And I would ask, "Well, what is it you're trying to get? What do you think you're going to get out of that?" "Well, it's going to have that old school warm sound." And we go back to the language. What is it
Mm-hmm.
what does that mean to you? And why do you think it can't be had out of a computer? And using the techniques, that I use. And, when you start digging in a little deeper, you get the answers that you're hoping that they realize. Uh, hey, uh, we're getting something beeping there. I don't know
There
what
we
that
go.
is.
Yeah, there was just a slight, small, like 5-second break in the said poor internet connection. We're up and
Oh,
going again though.
anyways, so I had somebody come to me and say, "Hey, I want to mix this in like, a 2-day period, and I've got 15 songs." Like, and they want to mix it on an analog board at a studio. And I just was like, that's just not feasible.
For $1 million, yes, I can do this.
Right. But not even for that. I mean, it's just like they only had the budget to book the studio for 2 days. I was like, let's do it at my place. We'll do it in the box. In fact, I'll do some test mixes and you tell me what you think. And they heard the mixes and they were like, "Oh, this sounds great. This is exactly what I want." I'm like, "Well, you dictating the tools that we use to do this does not make sense to me."
So Zave says, I'm all on for learning, but I find that there's an information overkill on the net. I think we all get loads of emails from guys on how to mix better. Not, not Rob. Thanks, Zave. Appreciate that. I don't send out a ton
Yeah.
of emails at all. If anything, I probably neglect my email list, and it just gets confusing. So when it comes down to that, Zave, you have to develop sort of, I guess a good way to put this is you have to have enough street smarts really to know, and enough knowledge yourself, which you'll learn over time who's BSing and who's actually giving you some good straight answers. But the main thing that you need to do is, yet again, I know I keep coming back to this, and like I said, this is probably hurting me more than it's helping me, because I'm like, no, don't buy courses, but I sell courses. So, but the main thing is, yet again, dive in there, learn it for yourself. And then when somebody says the only way to get a good guitar sound is to record it through an amp setting on 10 and an EQ boost here, and then you can go, well, wait a minute, what room is it in? What amp are they using? Then you can kind of start to pick through that yourself. And yes, although it does get confusing, the one thing that you wanted to realize from what I said a minute ago, the best way to get to mix better is to just do it.
Yeah, and I want to add to that, in that anybody that, you know, tells you this is the way it's done, or this is how to achieve, this is the only way to do this, or, this is, if they place absolutes around some of this stuff, that's when my red flags go up.
Right.
Now,
Bingo.
if somebody says, "This is how I do this," or "This is what worked for me here," I'll show you how I did that, and if you wanna take those ideas, great, but to get, these people who are just, saying, "This is the way it is," I don't believe them at all.
And
And then
I've actually went as far as I've torqued their gourd before, and went as far as, there was an individual who was going back and forth with me one time about the only way you can get a good guitar sound is through a real amp with air moving and all of this. And so I specifically created a post where I recorded a plug-in, an amp emulation, but I had the camera on the amp. And so this guy that was going back and forth with me about, and I said, so do you think this sounds better? And he was like, oh yeah, see, I told you, man, if you go through an amp and you have that air moving, you got it set on 10, dude, and I said, that's an amp simulation. And he got so upset with me. But the point is it's like, and I say this all the time too, there are no rules when it comes to recording. Yes, there are general guidelines, like obviously you don't want to clip. Obviously you don't want to put a singer in front of a condenser microphone without a pop filter unless they're standing far enough away. There are some obvious guidelines that we got to follow, but for the most part, that's what I love about audio. Like if you break a rule, it usually turns into something cool. Like
yeah.
most of the effects that we have right now, like delays and reverbs and stuff like that, were like accidents. And I can't remember. Maybe you could remember, Matt, who it was. I know it was the Beatles, but I can't remember which one bumped up against the tape machine, and it caused the tape to drag a little bit. And that's actually where we got that tape delay sound. I believe it was. There's like a legendary story.
I don't know the story. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'll have to find it. If I can find it, guys, I'll post it in the description of the video so you can go and check it out. But okay, so I'm going to get a couple more questions from the audience, and then I got one last question to ask Matt, and then we need to let him go, guys, because he's got
Then it's lunchtime.
Yes, his belly is between us, and we don't want to stand between a man and his food.
Yeah.
So another question from Jamie says, is there a plug-in for warmth? There is a plug for warmth.
But what does that mean? One person's warmth is another person's cloudy, right?
Right.
So there, I get, without trying to be clever, yes, sure. There's things for warmth, but where to use them, why to use them, that really is the tricky question, the $1 million question. And that's really up to you all and how you work. If you need that, then great, use it. Absolutely. But is there one way to do it? No. And there's a million plugins that claim to provide warmth, but um, it all it all starts at the beginning of the signal chain, how you record something. But see, that's the trick too, is that, and I'm actually working on, we talk about these recording series. I've been very hesitant to release any kind of content, paid content on that level, but I am working on a video series right now uh, regarding troubled tracks that as I refer to them. And they're, all the videos out there that people have, they, on the high end, it kind of baffles me sometimes. They're always like the most pristine, well recorded, pieces of audio you've ever heard. And then they show how they barely do anything to really kind of get it in shape. And that always frustrated me. I always
Right.
thought somebody needs to put something up where they've taken like, the worst recording or, a very poorly recorded set of drums and show how to get something magical out of it and struggle a bit. And so that's what I'm working on now. I'm working on this video course called Mixing with Troubled Tracks. And it's just that. It's, here's a song, here's where I got it. Let's listen to a bit of it. And then here are the raw tracks, and here's how I got those raw tracks to this end goal. So people can cherry pick the ideas and kind of get some inspiration to, deal with a poorly recorded song. And that's really, I think, a little more realistic nowadays because there's a lot of very poorly recorded material out there, and it takes a lot of effort to get through that. And watching a video from someone, no offense to you, of course, or any of my peers who have great videos out, but watching a video of somebody taking a pristinely recorded bit of audio and turning it into an even better mix, that's not going to help too much. You need some guidance on how to get around the problems.
Right. Well, man, when you get that course up and running, let me know. I will do my best to pitch that as much as I possibly can, just simply because I predominantly work in and around like people who are operating out of a home studio, a project studio, something in their basement. And so that would be like right up their alley. And I will do my best to get that into their hands because I feel like that would be a great value to them. And as soon as you get the nuts and bolts of that all figured out, let me know. I'd be happy to pitch that out to the audience. So
Awesome. Yeah. I'll, inspiration for me to finish the course.
there you go. Okay, guys, I'm going to go ahead and close the questions from the group. Oh, I'm sorry. I got a couple more that just, oh no, those aren't questions. Those are more statements.
Jamie's question or Jamie's statement there. I got my trouble tracks from folk music from Peru and Bolivia. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in some ways, Jamie, it's fun when you get tracks that are troubled and to kind of put the blood, sweat, and tears into making it happen. Sometimes I think that's more fun.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close the questions from the comments section now. Of course, you can always comment on the video after it's said and done. And then if you would like to get in touch with Matt, how can they do that, Matt?
If you want to get in touch with me directly, I'm on LinkedIn. You can contact me there. I accept requests. I'm on Facebook, but I'm not really on Facebook.
Right.
I just don't like being there. Plus, you can head on over to mattboudreau.com, which I link to, and you can contact me there or go to the podcast, workingclassaudio.com.
Awesome. All right, so my final question, this is the one that I always give every interview, and I do this on purpose, so this is going to throw you off for a reason, okay? Matt, what is your favorite color?
Black.
All right, now, Matt, what does the color black smell like?
I've never thought of it that way. Yeah, this is going to throw me. The color black is neutral. It doesn't have an odor to it. It doesn't have a smell.
Oh my goodness. You and Matt or Applebaum had almost, actually, he went even deeper and he went like all deep thought into it about how it's not actually black. It's a combination of, but anyway, the reason I love asking this question is because when you ask someone who's a creative, they always come up with a creative answer. I've never had anyone on my podcast that has not came up with some kind of a creative answer. So that is awesome. Well, Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to stop by. I really appreciate you being on here. And if at any time in the future, if there's anything that I can do for you, let me know. I'd be more than happy to help you because you have been a great blessing to me just coming on and chatting today. And also you've provided a lot of value for the audience as well. So thank you so much once again for your time. And guys, all of the links to find Matt, to find his podcast, his website, anything about Matt, I'm going to be including in the description of this video down below. So go and check that out and make sure that you leave him a good review in iTunes because that's the nice thing to do. I keep telling people to do that and I'm not getting enough reviews myself, but I know you'll do it for him because he's cooler. Okay.
No, I'm not.
So
yeah,
guys,
go to working class audio on iTunes or Apple Music or wherever you get your podcasts, and you can give it a good rating if you want. But listen to it first to make sure you like it, because I don't want you to rate it. Because Rob thinks I'm cool.
You'll love it. You'll love it. He's being too humble. So guys, remember that this channel exists to simplify the complexities of the home studio and help you make professional sounding music in a less than professional space. If you can dream it, you can create it, and together we all can achieve it. Thank you so much for stopping by. And like I said, leave as many comments as you want. I'll still be stopping back by on the video to make sure that we can answer those questions as well. And if you want to shoot any questions to Matt, feel free to do that as well. One last thing that I always like to do as well before I leave is I want to give a shout out to my chart toppers. So James Sheets, thank you so much. You're number one on the chart right now with a $10 donation through Super Chat. Zave Ryan, you gave a generous $5. Appreciate you guys. You're still on the top of the charts. No one's bumped you out of your positions yet. So thank you all so much for stopping by. Love you all.